This episode of Capes and Lunatics is brought to you by Tweaked Audio. Get awesome headphones, go to tweakedaudio.com and use the coupon code Southgate to get 30% off, free shipping, and a lifetime warranty. Or you can get there through the link on our website, southgatemediagroup.com. Hey everyone, Phil here. Well, after last week's big road trip and Capes Lunatics episode 100, we decided to take the week off and refresh and reboot and come back next week with our big Avengers Endgame coverage. So until then, you can sit back and relax and enjoy the Batman and Pop Culture conference that I was able to take part in. I'd like to thank everyone for having me, and we all had a great time, so sit back, relax, and listen to Batman and Pop Culture, and we'll see you next week for Avengers Endgame.
Here, I'm Director of Collections for the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. If you're not familiar, Children's Museum of Indianapolis is the largest museum for families with children in the world. Occupies about 500,000 square feet and 29 acres. And we cover a whole variety of topics that are of interest to children and their families. So archaeology, paleontology, space exploration, fine arts, humanities, in addition to popular culture. And we view our audiences, I think, which is why I ended up on the We Are Family. Our primary audiences are families with children. We think of ourselves as a collections-based institution, and so what that means is that we create experiences that promote successful family learning using objects. And that can be kinesthetic, they can move them around, it can be investigative. So we create these experiences for our audiences, families with children, using objects, the stuff of life that create clues and memories and have meaning for people. So, what I want to talk about today, I want to introduce you to the Kevin Silva Batman collection at my museum so that you're aware of it as a resource. I want to talk a little bit about the material culture of Batman, how it, in the storylines, helps to create place and culture and character identity. I want to talk about how Batman material culture has been merchandised and how collectors use that to create their own personal identity. And then I want to talk a little bit about the sorts of experiences that we're able to create using that material culture, and hopefully tap into your nostalgia of Bat memorabilia. Most of us probably first became infatuated with Batman as kids, and I bet you there's a toy in here somewhere that resonates with your experience. So, I want to talk about material culture. Anthropologists study what they call material culture, which can be defined as tangible things or objects that are created and used by members of a society, such as clothes, tools, buildings, and art. The non-material culture would be those things you can't touch, values, social norms, and customs. Material culture is often used as a device in storytelling, to create fictional characters, to create place, These are some other objects that are currently on exhibit at our museum, and I bet you immediately recognize the storyline they're from. It's Indiana Jones' whip and Indiana Jones' hat, and then next to that is his dad's diary and the cross from the third Indiana Jones movie. So they're very identifiable symbols that are used in a story to set it in a specific time and to help as an extension of a character. I'm going to jump a little bit here, but bear with me. A couple of years ago, we had an opportunity to acquire a different kind of material culture, and that was the Batman memorabilia collection of a local collector in Indianapolis, Kevin Silva. I don't know if some of you may know him. He's been associated with Batman for a long time. He collected Batman memorabilia for over 40 years and sort of created his own Batcave in his own suburban split-level basement. And meticulously collected memorabilia, both licensed and unlicensed, from the whole Batman universe. And there came a time when he decided he was Guinness Book of World Record holder for a number of years for the largest collection of Batman memorabilia. But he also said, I lay awake at night worrying that my pipes were going to burst and that all that stuff that I'd accumulated would be ruined. And at the same time, I've got all this stuff and nobody sees it. And so we'd had a relationship working with Kevin for a number of years. We'd borrow things for exhibits. And so he contacted us, and we entered into negotiation and ended up acquiring more than 3,500 pieces of Batman memorabilia. What had been isn't currently the Guinness Book of World Records' largest collection of Batman memorabilia, but certainly is still the largest collection of Batman memorabilia in a public collection. And so I was thinking about how to introduce this collection to you. And like I said, it's late in the day, and I think we should have a little bit of fun. So I thought of one of my favorite stories, which is David Macaulay's book, Motel of the Mysteries. And I use this a lot with students and interns of both archaeology or curation. In this book, David Macaulay, who's an illustrator and story writer, sort of recreates the story of Howard Carter finding King Tut's tomb in Egypt. But he flips it, and instead of finding King Tut's tomb, he instead uncovers, sometime in the distant future, a Holiday Inn. And so they look into that Holiday Inn, they look at the objects that are located there, the dresser and the ashtray and the set of towels and the TV, and they draw conclusions from the future about what this culture was and what were the meaning of those objects. Now, they draw a lot of incorrect conclusions, and this is the cautionary tale that I give students, is be careful when you look at an object and you make assumptions about a whole culture based on that object. But it's also a fun way to look at objects and to try and draw some conclusions about the culture that created them and used them. So, if you will, I want to take you on a journey, and let's look at those objects, and let's pretend that earthquake that we know hit Gotham, what if it hit Indianapolis? And Kevin Silva's basement was buried for centuries, and archaeologists and curators found that basement full of Batman memorabilia. What would they find, and what would they deduce about the culture of Gotham? And what would it tell us about the character of Batman? And what would it tell us about that subculture of collectors of Batman memorabilia? One of the first things I think they would notice is a repetition of symbols. You see some of the same symbology over and over again. And of course, symbols are very powerful visually. The bat symbols, the cape, the wings, the cowl, repeated over and over again. So obviously we would deduce that this was extremely important to that character and to that subculture. You might also see the symbols of DC and even WB. We know that that's because there's a big business in licensing merchandise that is controlled by DC. They work regularly with manufacturers all across the world who submit ideas for products. They work with their whole design book to make sure that the product fits within the parameters of the characters and the storylines. They make suggestions for changes, and they also reject licensing. They have a whole wall of shame in the Warner Brothers offices of all the things that have been rejected by them in the past. So we would see a lot of those symbols over and over in objects. I think we would learn a lot about the characters and the place of Gotham by some of the things we would find, because they repeat over and over again. Clothing is one of the material culture items that certainly define Batman. Again, through all the different iterations of Batman, the black cape, the cowl, certainly are there, concealing the identity of Bruce Wayne. The tight torso of the suit and the leggings emphasize both strength but also humanity. I think we would deduce in finding this that Batman, this revered character from the past, was certainly human. Analysis, he's a little bit ominous. Certainly a guarded character, but also buff. This is one of the vehicles that we heard about earlier today from Mark that has visited my museum in the past. But I think in the collection we'd also find a lot of vehicles, which are really the ultimate gadgets and also carriers of gadgets. And all those vehicles, whether it's a Batcopter or a Batboat or a Batmobile, they make Batman go quickly. Well, what's the analysis of that? Well, again, he's human. He can't fly by himself. He's a bit of a risk taker, maybe pretty flamboyant, judging from the look of some of these, and obviously rich. And gadgets. We'd find lots of gadgets. They help him keep his secrets. They communicate. He always seems to have the right tool for the right occasion to foil his opponent's powers, and mostly without guns. So what could we deduce from those objects? Well, he's smart. He's calculating because he always has the right thing at the right time. Definitely creative. He's an early adopter. He likes technology, even though he's not in favor of firearms. So, what would we find in that bat cave in Kevin Silva's basement? Well, a lot of comic books. These are the texts. If you think about investigating an ancient culture, you find the objects, but finding the texts is also a wonderful thing. And so these provide us a lot of verbal explanation of those objects that we find. The museum itself has about 17,000 comic books, and so they are a wonderful resource. We'd find some objects that are actually screen-used props and costumes. And we know that the collectors hold these in high esteem. You see here Adam West stunt cape, another object from the TV show and from the movies. These are sometimes sold by the studios, sometimes they'll walk away with the actors, sometimes discarded and saved by crew members. And we have the opportunity, as we learned earlier today, to purchase those from auction houses or to get them from our collectors. Just like in the story, the costume is important, so for collectors, the costumes are important. But what we realize is these people from the past who collected Batman didn't only have costumes for the adults, but they extended down to the children, even to babies. And so one of those early experiences of being dressed up in a Batman costume, putting on the masks, whether it's for Halloween or just for play, is important to the collector and starts at a very early age. Also extends to clothing and apparel, and that can be both licensed, like these roller skates, or unlicensed, like the really cool shoes over here. People like to wear apparel that shows those same symbols and logos and create an identity for themselves, just like many of us have done here today. Vehicles, of course, one of those early toys that a lot of us probably grew up playing with were the vehicles, the ultimate gadgets from Batman. They can be motorcycles, they can be tumblers, they can be the cars from the comic books, bat copters, bat boats, lots of vehicles. Both the carriers of the gadgets and also the gadgets themselves. And the other gadgets that you carry or work at, the little computer console, the gadgets to collect evidence, like a camera. Of course, the batarangs and the utility belts and gadgets for communication, like walkie-talkies. A lot of times, collectors are interested in quality reproductions, like this great bust that you see, which of course conceals the button to get into the Batcave. Collectors like to have miniature settings of the Batcave, or over here a comic book holder that's actually a reproduction of Gotham for use in a comic book store. Action figures, which we heard about earlier. Many action figures, starting in the 60s and then really accelerating in the 70s. You have the counterpart to Barbie, which is the action figure for boys. Don't call it a doll, you call it an action figure, and then boys will use it. Originally about the same size as Barbie dolls, until the late 70s when Star Wars becomes popular. You get the little action figures because the vehicles become more important, and so you need a little figure to go in there. And the Batman figures follow suit and also come out with small figures. So the action figures primarily designed and marketed originally to kids, but there are also these high-end collectible figurines created by artisans for a collector's market. They're limited in production. They're very artistic. They're very three-dimensional in their sculpture. What you see over on the right is a prototype for a collectible figure. But these are mixed in with the action figures that are designed for children. And of course, there's not just items in the collection that are for Batman, but also those objects that represent the whole universe of Batman. The villains, the allies, are represented as well. There's also a lot of licensed product packaging. Here's a box for ice cream, SpaghettiOs, and an Avon box for bubble bath. So a lot of product packaging through the ages, marketed to all sorts of demographics, mostly kids, carrying the Batman name and logo. And lots of items to create your own personal identity. Kevin Silva's very first acquisition was this metal lunchbox. And whether it was Batman or something else, many of us probably had a lunchbox growing up that was sort of an extension of your identity. You know, people, they say today that your cell phone is an extension of who you are. I think in the 60s and 70s, in many ways for kids, that lunchbox said something about who they were. And I love this sale rack of buttons. Gives you an ability to sort of customize or personalize what you want to say about your identity in Batman by choosing which button you have. So once we get that collection out of the Batcave and into the museum, there are some real challenges with preserving that collection. 20th and 21st century toys and figures create a whole host of problems for curators for preservation long term. When we talk about ancient objects that are out of ceramics or metals, they're stable in many ways. But plastics and synthetics off-gas, they deteriorate rapidly. The packaging that's plastic interacts with the object that's plastic and speeds up the deterioration. Fabrics are sensitive to changes in humidity. Dyes fade by exposure to light, and particularly to ultraviolet light. And paper and cardboard contain all sorts of chemicals that create, one of my favorite terms, what we call inherent vice, which means that it self-destructs. And so not only do we have to interpret what these objects are, but we have to do our best to create a stable environment to be able to preserve these for the future. And finally, we have the opportunity to use these for interpretation for families with children. We do this in our permanent exhibition, American Pop, the Galleries of American Arts and Popular Culture. This is focused on families with children, and the idea is to give an opportunity for families to talk with one another, parents or grandparents with children, about things like the origins of pop culture. Where does it come from? Who creates it? How do people use it to create personal identities about themselves? And what do the storylines mean so they can be intelligent consumers? Included in that exhibition is a recreated portion of Kevin Silva's basement so we can talk about collectors' interests and how they display their collection. We also create traveling exhibitions like this one that we did last year, licensing with DC, called DC Superheroes, Discover Your Superpowers, which included both loans from DC of actual costumes from their archive, as well as interactives that allow families with children to solve clues, to battle crime, to fight for justice, and to, of course, see some of the pieces from the Kevin Silva collection. And why does Batman work for our audiences? Well, there's a number of reasons. It's multi-generational. We like to focus on popular culture lines that are multi-generational. If our audience is families with children, it's great to have something that the grandparents are familiar with and collected, the parents, the children, aunts and uncles, so that you can share, reminisce, tell stories, and that everybody is familiar with. So it has universal appeal. It's also useful because the objects are about storytelling, and we find that we can begin to help kids understand what are the components of storytelling: character, plot, action, movement through the different phases of the story. And for the most part, we can choose those elements that are audience appropriate. Obviously, we know there are elements of Batman that may or may not be age appropriate, but there's plenty of material that we can choose that our audiences will find to be audience appropriate. So, again, I want to encourage you all to come see the collection, but more important, since it's been newly acquired, I want you to be aware that it exists, that both our comic books and our Batman merchandise and the other 50,000 or so pop culture objects that we have in the collection are available to you for your research, and so I encourage you to take advantage of that. Thank you. All right, you're up.
Okay. Yep, that's it. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so I feel like the family has been touched on a lot, so some of my thunder has been stolen earlier in this conference, but let's go. So many people have mentioned the 1970s series Batman Family, so as that indicates, Batman and Family go back a pretty long way, 70s and beyond. I would like to talk...
Quick wait on that.
Wait now.
Okay. Okay, I would like to talk about the late 80s and early 90s, in which the introduction of a new Robin brought the family closer together, and the early 2000s run of the book Batman Gotham Knights, which explicitly showcased Batman's relationship with his family. As Susanna Polo and writer Devin Grayson discussed in a very recent interview on Polygon, this era was a bit of a Bat family sweet spot. It was, quote, the twilight of the post-crisis universe with over a decade of history, end quote, to work with. Although Bruce Wayne adopted Jason Todd, the family dynamic in the earlier 80s was somewhat attenuated. Dick Grayson and Jason Todd only interacted occasionally, particularly after Crisis. Crisis on Infinite Earths changed how they met, with Dick finding out about Jason via the newspaper in Batman 416. The two got along during that case, but Dick was a fixture in the new Teen Titans. Coupled with bad blood between Bruce and Dick, and Dick being in Titans, there were practical and narrative reasons to keep the two Robins apart. And then Jason died. We all know the story of his demise. Some people didn't warm Jason for a variety of reasons and voted for his death. But the New York Times headline after his death is telling. Holy bomb blast! The real Robin fights on. Even in a story covering his death, Jason was not the real Robin. Because the story is assuring you, like, Dick Grayson's not dead. It's just some other kid. Which I always feel like... I hope Jason, when he came back from the dead, didn't see this headline. Because it would just really add to his issues. Okay. However, the character of Robin, of course, wasn't gone for long. Tim Drake was teased in Batman Year 3 and properly introduced in A Lonely Place of Dying, both by Marv Wolfman. He introduced himself first to Dick, because Tim was designed to want to be Robin, and perhaps to get reader and fan approval for a new Robin, so I didn't end up with this again. Since Tim sought out Dick first, he facilitated Nightwing's return to the Batman fold, and thus a major aspect of the 90s and 00s Batman family was born, the Nightwing and Robin bond. That just pops up now. By the late 80s and early 90s, it really wasn't okay to show a quick training montage a la Detective 40 and then have Robin swing into action. Tim went through many issues of training, including an early session with Dick. In the New Titans number 65 of April 1990, Tim shows up unannounced at Dick's apartment, wanting Dick to teach him how to be Batman's partner. Even this early on, we can see the camaraderie between the two, with Tom Grummett, the artist, showing Dick affectionately ruffling Tim's hair and agreeing to teach him. After lessons, on the bottom, Dick sends Tim off with encouragement, letting him know that he'll make it as Robin because he's, quote, one of the very best. And then, after over a decade of starring in the new Teen Titans and its various iterations, Dick came back to Gotham. Robin and Nightwing had some early team-ups in Showcase 93, issues 11 and 12, which are set during the Nightfall arc. Tim is attempting to work with John Paul Valley, but things aren't going well. This arc is called Partners, emphasizing the wildly different relationships Tim has with Nightwing and the substitute Batman. Tim appreciates working with Dick because Nightwing treats him better, acknowledging his worth as a partner. That's on that one where some cop is like, why are you working with a kid? And he's like, I don't see a better partner around. Then Dick also sympathizes with him being a kid, and sorry, that one, I put too much on there. Because Nightwing treats Tim better. He acknowledges his worth as a partner, and he offers him this compromise that can best be offered by someone who's been both the younger and now the older partner. Nightwing promises to Tim, quote, you remember you're a kid, and I won't treat you like one. That's in that panel. It's hard to see, but I promise it's there. Nightwing never had a relationship this close with Jason Todd's Robin. Dick's major reestablishment in Gotham City, though, occurred in the 1994-95 Prodigal storyline, in which Dick finally serves as Batman after Bruce, injured by Bane, removed Jean-Paul Valley. Throughout Prodigal, the various authors developed a Dick-Tim bond, from cleaning together to drinking orange juice the same way, in a way that is no doubt very much Alfred unapproved, to Dick making Tim help him fold laundry. The storyline emphasizes their easy bond. The two build each other up and have a good camaraderie. At one point in this arc, Dixon even has Tim ruminate, author Chuck Dixon, even has Tim ruminate that perhaps he became Robin, quote, to fill the empty place in my life. That is, there you can see there, it came up. That empty place being his parents' chronic absences. Already, Tim is starting to see Dick and Bruce as surrogate family members. Of course, the very title of the arc, Prodigal, denotes its emphasis on family. Dick is the prodigal son returning home. In fact, the end of the arc features Dick and Bruce burying the hatchet. Bruce acknowledges he mishandled Dick's transition to adulthood, which is like somewhat of an understatement depending on which thing you're reading, and left things unsaid. However, the Dark Knight figures that's the way it always is, quote, between fathers and sons. This is a really strong acknowledgement of the familial nature of the Bat-Clan and of the relationship between Dick and Bruce, Batman, and the first Robin. Chuck Dixon developed Prodigal's groundwork throughout the 90s when he was the major writer of a lot of Batman titles, including both the Robin and Nightwing ones. In fact, once Nightwing had left for Bloodhaven, Robin would pop up as an occasional guest star. In Nightwing number 6, from March 1997, Robin stops by to visit. As the two are on a stakeout, complete with soup and sandwiches, Dick falls asleep, a testament to his trust and comfort in Tim's presence. When Tim is then caught up in an ambush that was meant for Dick alone, Nightwing goes into overdrive, protecting Tim not just because Tim needs it, but because, quote, he's family, the closest thing to a brother I'll ever have, end quote. That brotherly relationship is on further display in Nightwing 25 from October 1998, which I think is a favorite issue of many. The standalone issue entitled The Boys. The entire premise of the issue is that Nightwing takes Robin out to do balance training on moving trains and just generally hang out. Although they crack a few skulls, the entire issue centers on the two talking about life. It's not an exciting, punchy issue, but fans enjoy it because of the closeness of the interacting characters and humor. For instance, Robin tells Nightwing that his girlfriend is pregnant. Nightwing almost falls off the train, but it turns out it's by someone else. Nightwing tells Robin he's intending to become a police officer, which he hasn't told anyone else yet. Aside from the major reveals that show their trust in each other, the story also features brotherly banter, such as Nightwing calling Robin a little twerp after the younger teased him. Later, Robin threatens to tell Batman about something Nightwing did if Dick doesn't answer a personal question. This is so reminiscent of younger siblings threatening older ones with, "I'm telling Dad," when they don't get their way, that it probably brings a smile to readers' faces. If you have siblings, you've probably been on at least one side of this equation, if not both. In seeing our own life experiences repeated in the comic, we can easily recognize the brotherly dynamic. And then I want to jump to Batman Gotham Knights. In this, Devin Grayson emphasizes the family aspect of the Batman series. It was like her main goal in writing it. Which debuted in early 2000. Issue 1 is cover dated March 2000. In a recent interview, Devin Grayson noted she's thematically, quote, interested in a lot of made families, the families we create for ourselves as opposed to our biological families, end quote, and Gotham Knights really leans into that. The series especially highlighted Batman and then Bruce Wayne's relationships with his family. In the beginning, the series featured quotations from files that Bruce wrote, examining Batman's allies and his thoughts on himself and his chosen family. In issue number 2, Batman is working with Cassandra Cain, the new Batgirl. Batgirl's relatively new to the superhero game and has a tendency towards self-sacrifice, which Batman fears is rooted in self-loathing over her assassin past. When Batgirl once again moves to sacrifice herself, Batman declines to save her, noting, quote, if you want to continue working with me, with my family, you need to commit, end quote. After Batgirl saves herself, showing that she believes she is a person who can be good and do good, she is officially a, quote, trusted acolyte, and on her way to being a larger part of the family. Again, this is a family, not just a loosely connected group of vigilantes. Issue 6 makes the subtext of family the main text when Batman retrieves a letter of Barbara Gordon's from a lockbox in a bank. The letter suggests that Jim Gordon might actually be Barbara's biological father, which I know she used to be, but she has never asked him about this. After Barbara gets done yelling at Batman about his own parental shortcomings, which is kind of funny, she admits she desperately wants Jim to be her biological father, because according to her, he's all she has. Batman quickly reminds her that Jim will always love her, whether she's his biological daughter or niece, and that Barbara is, quote, wrong to think he's all you have, end quote. Given their closeness in the panel, drawn by Paul Ryan and John Floyd, Batman clearly means that Barbara also has him and the Bat family by extension. In his files, Batman comments on shifting the focus in his relationship with Oracle. Quote, sometimes people influence you not so much by what they mean to you as by what they allow you to mean to them, end quote. For Barbara, this notion would apply not just to her relationship with Batman, but also to her relationship with Jim. He's her father because that's what he means to her. And Batman is a family member too, because of what he means to her, which is clearly something based on her facial expression in the panel. The realization Batman has in 6 with his Oracle file concerning what people allow you to mean to them has ramifications in some of his other relationships. This gets us to the Hugo Strange arc of issues 8 through 11, which hits on the theme of family really hard, particularly when it concerns Batman and his first Robin. Tim, on the computer, is reading some of Batman's file on Nightwing, in which the Dark Knight ponders that perhaps he took on the original Robin because he knew, quote, somewhere in the back of his head that he couldn't face the entirety of his mission alone, end quote. Dr. Strange, who wants to be Batman and sometimes thinks he is, attempts to undercut this message, claiming here that he thinks Batman only keeps Nightwing around because it flatters his ego. Strange thereby tries to get inside Nightwing's head by attempting to sow doubt concerning the family dynamic. Strange also uses the family dynamic in his mission to prove Bruce Wayne is Batman. After hearing from Robin, that Nightwing should save his younger brother before Batman, Strange threatens them both. With permission from Robin, Nightwing saves a Bruce Wayne who doesn't remember he's Batman, while Robin saves himself. This breaks Strange's hold on reality. He runs off, and that's that famous panel where you get Batman running saying, "I'm a model of mental health!" If you've ever seen it circulating on the internet. And the day is saved. Back at the Batcave, Nightwing says the fabled oath to fight crime and corruption and never swerve from the path of justice, of which Bruce had set as the trigger to release him from self-hypnosis. Family has thus hastened Bruce's recovery, suggesting the Dark Knight was onto something in the back of his head when he realized facing the mission alone might not be the best option. And the same arc in 11 at the end. After Bruce reveals he wrote the files, he says, particularly to Dick, "It was interesting to watch you when you were starting to believe that I was just Bruce Wayne. You have almost no relationship with that man. And the problem is, Dick, neither do I." This in particular sets the stage for one of the major Bruce Wayne family developments in the early 2000s. In issue number 17 of July 2001, in an encounter with the villain Manitoa, a villain who consumes the souls and then the abilities of people in order to go on living forever, inspires Bruce to do some thinking about the nature of forever. Bruce decides that passing things down to your children is the type of forever that truly counts, so Bruce Wayne offers to legally adopt Dick Grayson. Even as he signs the document, Dick points out to Bruce that he already has a family, naming the many allies of the Batman. But Dick gives real names, Tim, Barbara, Cassandra, serving as a reminder that Bruce Wayne, not just Batman, can count on all these people. And although Batman in full cape and cowl initiated the conversation, Bruce has removed the cowl by the end of that conversation. Dick reminds Bruce he has a family, not just that Batman has a family of allies. Dick Grayson and Bruce Wayne are both building a relationship with Bruce Wayne, who Bruce admitted had been taking a backseat a few issues previously. Bruce Wayne then continues to legally develop his relationships with his allies throughout the 2000s. Bruce adopts Tim in the face-to-face arc of May through August 2006. This was a major step in their relationship as well. When Tim's father was first killed in Identity Crisis, Tim purposely invented an uncle to be his guardian so it wouldn't be Bruce. As Robin, Tim had been part of Batman's family for years, but it took Tim longer to reach a suitable place with Bruce Wayne. Something similar happened with Cassandra Cain. Although in real time she'd known Batman since 1999, she was not adopted by Bruce Wayne until the 2008 Batgirl miniseries. Over time, these members of the Batman family became legally recognized members of Bruce Wayne's family. Nevertheless, the two groups do not perfectly coincide. While that is probably the subject of a different paper, there are two practical reasons I can think of that explain it. Given that superheroing involves secret identities, it would make sense to keep the circles from overlapping completely. In addition, some of Bruce's allies, such as Jim Gordon and Barbara Gordon, are not in a position to be adopted by Bruce Wayne. Finally, these adoptions are not what makes the family a family anyway. They are just a legal denouement. Even though Batman has a reputation as a loner, and he sometimes is, family is a huge part of Batman and Bruce Wayne's world. Bruce builds relationships with Gotham heroes as both Batman and Bruce, and those allies also build relationships with each other. The Bats are a tightly woven web of relationships, able to call on each other whenever yet another earthquake or pandemic or some other generic crisis hits, while also having occasional difficulties with each other. Batman's family is full of rich, well-developed characters who in turn make Batman and his books a richer character and more fun to read. Thank you.
We got all the smart people out of the way, the crazy comic book podcast will get up and talk. What? And I'll start, I will get to the current era, but first I wanted to get in a little into why does Batman have this big cast of characters? I mean, considering he's probably known as like this dark loner, he probably has the most sidekicks of anyone in modern pop culture. So it's like, why does he have all these sidekicks? I think we know the real answer is, for the comic books, it's like, could you relate to this guy sitting in a cave for 80 years talking to himself? And basically people would be like, why isn't this guy locked up in Arkham? But story-wise, why does he have all these kids around? It's like, is he saving them from a darker fate? Or are they saving him from becoming another Arkham lunatic? And is it legacy? Because unlike some Boy Scout in Metropolis, Bruce Wayne knows he's not going to be around forever, so he's building these soldiers, these contingency plans, these weapons maybe, for family also, because And of course, also for Bruce, like I said, Bruce Wayne, to keep him from going crazy. But like my son says, it's not as lonely in the dark when you have someone with you. Because of course, it started with Dick Grayson in Detective Comics 38, and you know he's like was said, he served as Batman. He's going to be the next head of the family. And then we've got Jason Todd, also mentioned, who basically Bruce Wayne took in to keep from becoming the next supervillain. And then we get Tim Drake, who is the conscience of the family, I think. He can question Bruce Wayne and everyone else respectfully, unlike Jason Todd. And then, of course, we get to Damian Wayne, Bruce Wayne's actual biological son, who was basically just created as almost like wrong company, but a what-if story. But Grant Morrison brought him in the current continuity. He's basically, I see him as the bridge of the Bat family. He's closer to all the Robins, especially Dick Grayson, than he actually is to his father. So he's like the bridge between the Robins and Batman. Another one trying to prove himself, almost like some of the others, that he can be the next Batman. And of course, he's closer to Dick Grayson than he actually is to his own father, because I think he spent more time with him. He's always pushing himself away from Bruce Wayne, but he always seems to seek out Dick Grayson. Even if he tries to hide it, he's always seeking Dick Grayson's approval. He's more comfortable with Dick Grayson. But yeah, Damian never shows his emotions with Bruce Wayne. Well, besides anger with Bruce Wayne, but it seems like he's a more well-rounded, adjustable person with Dick Grayson. So I think we can all agree Dick Grayson is the best character out of them all. Yes, because you can hear me and Professor Gaiman talk about Dick Grayson every month on the Capes and Lunatics podcast. And that's about it.
Yeah, we technically built us with a round table, but we have 5 minutes for round table.
Question about the museum, which is really interesting.
Yes.
With you having like costumes from looks like Batman versus Superman, how much red tape and things like that are the things that you can do with them, can't do with them, like
In terms of loans from the
loans
studios?
for the studios, of like how stringent are they with those?
It depends on the franchise and it depends on the owner. We spend years building relationships with Paramount, Warner Brothers, Fox. So, I've been out to all their archives, and generally they've been to see us. A lot of times loans are helped when we're also licensing their name for an exhibition. So when we're doing an exhibit with Nickelodeon, they're going to be a lot more likely to lend us something. If we're working with an exhibit and it's DC Comics, we're working with one arm of the company for the licensing. We're working with a different arm of the company that holds the collection, but we make sure the two talk to each other. So if the licensing arm is really excited about us traveling and exhibit all around North America, they're communicating with the archive to make sure we get the good stuff.
Are there, just a follow-up, are there things that is it more open-ended, like, oh, we would like to have such and such, and you get told, well, no, you can't have this, but you can do that, or are they more...
Generally, we tell them what we want, and then they tell us what they have.
Gotcha.
We're working on an exhibit right now on ancient Greece, and so we're talking to the Greek government, but we're also talking about the impact of pop culture in America, talking about ancient Greece. And so we're borrowing Percy Jackson items from Fox, and we're borrowing Hercules items from Paramount. And so we'll go in and say, we'd like, the Zeus's lightning bolt. And then they say, well, either sure you can have it or we don't have that, but you can have this.
Thank you.
Do they charge you for that?
Most of the studios do not.
Nice.
We have to pay for the insurance. We have to pay for the shipping, which can be sizable. We borrowed the Tumbler a number of years ago, and that's not cheap to.
Did somebody just
ship.
drive it over?
Well,
it's probably not.
No, it comes with a specialized flatbed truck, so that can be expensive. If we're borrowing from private collectors, they'll generally charge us a loan fee. So we'll go to the studios first. If the studios don't have it, we know a whole range of private collectors. And we also acquire. So, a gentleman was here from Mears earlier, but we work with other auction houses that specialize in Hollywood props, and sometimes we can acquire something ourselves as well.
What'd you say the name of your show was?
The Capes and Lunatics podcast.
Sure, yes. Oh, I was going to say glasses, but you both have glasses. So. I don't know. Arm wrestle between the two of you. Who wants to be first?
T-shirt.
My question actually is, I'd love to hear your thoughts on in discussing the relationship between Damian Wayne and Bruce and with Dick. How being the biological child, essentially the child that Batman didn't choose, it affects his relationship with Damian and his ability to communicate with Damian, and perhaps maybe gives Dick a better relationship with him in the sense that no one gets to choose their sibling, but up until that point, Batman always got to choose what he wanted with Robin. He didn't get stuck with the kid prior to, and maybe in the way that many parents will. I'm sorry, I don't mean to mean that, but and as a parent myself, sometimes I look at kids and go, I love your kid, but you're not exactly what I wanted.
Well, I think it's you have to be you have to be flexible with a child, which Dick Grayson can be. Bruce Wayne, as we all know, is very rigid in his ways.
But do you think that? Okay, I mean that's great. I don't want to hog that conversation.
Yeah. All right. Other questions?
Wait, suit and glasses.
Oh, just a quick question. So for Chris,
yeah.
Do you routinely use pop culture to also, use it as a hook to talk about other historical or scientific topics?
We do frequently. I approach planning for each exhibition assuming that this is our visitors' very first time ever in a museum. Art museums are sometimes criticized for only preaching to the washed. We try to be at the other end of the spectrum and realize that we're sort of training a whole new generation of non-museum goers to potentially think of museums as part of their lives. And so we look for things that can be accessible for the child, but also for the parent. No parent who has never gone to a museum wants to feel stupid or look stupid in front of their kids. And so having points of access where they can begin a conversation is always really useful. And so it depends on what story we're telling, but if we can work something in that is familiar and then move them from the familiar to the unfamiliar, so much the better.
Can you speak to a little bit about Bruce's relationship with Alfred as being a semi-father figure, but also a boy? And if that relationship goes into how he beat Robin?
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, I realized that there wasn't too much about Alfred, but weirdly, Alfred does not get one of the... I was kind of first basing it on the people in the early run who get their own files, and Alfred does not get his own file, and oddly, we know there's a file on Tim, but we don't get any quotes from it. So that's why it's a little bit uneven there. But yes, since what is it? Since Crisis, Alfred's been more and more stepping into the father role. I think more though that the issue with Bruce and his parenting, I like to think. Let's see, I can't remember now which session where we were talking about it. Oh, probably the keynote comes from Bruce's parents dying before Bruce got to the really difficult stage. And I don't want to say that younger kids are not difficult because I'm not a parent and I don't know. But he never had those teenage years with his father. And I think that is maybe more of the problem is he very much idealizes his father, and their relationship was pretty good. And then when he gets these teenage Robins, he doesn't understand Like, why are you not just doing what I said? Why I feel like Bruce is better with younger kids because they're more apt to do what he wants, and then the teenager's like, what's happening with you? And then when they come back when they're adults, like, okay, you're a raised adult, and like, because, you know, you go through that cycle, like, I love my parents are idiots and don't know anything, and then, you know, you come out of college and you're like, whoa, my parents do know stuff, like, I need to call them when I have trouble with my laundry or whatever. I think that's like a good cycle for him. And I always think it has more to do with Bruce's relationship with his parents. But of course, yeah, the thing with Alfred being an employee is hugely, because it's like, you could almost fire your dad. And I mean, that's so messed up. But yes, but he loves Alfred, very much, so.
Plus, you have to ask, you know, is he here because he loves me or because I pay his salary?
But I think definitely Alfred. I mean, totally Alfred loves him, and we see that throughout. And I think Alfred is a great grandfather to all of the Robins. And I think I've seen some people say, and I definitely get it. I think part of the reason that the Robins who turn out so well is because they have Alfred, who's modifying some of Bruce's not as great parenting tendencies. Yes. And then you. At the back first, sorry. And then Joshua.
Oh, very good.
Also stepping in on the role of Alfred, maybe he could also be considered more like the mother figure in this context for the Robins, especially when Batman is the harsh, like he's a bad cop, like denying some food, for example, and then of course Alfred will give it to them.
Yeah, and I think
also this nurturing aspect of Alfred, also as the butler.
Yes. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think Alfred has both mother, but I also think grandparent tendency, because the thing is, yes, he provides a lot of the mother kind of things, and Bruce looks to him for advice, but ultimately Alfred, I think, is usually pretty careful to let Bruce, like, he lets Bruce have his final say. There's not that equality there, the way I think it more would and should be if you were a mother-father panel. And that's why I feel like it's maybe a little bit more of a grandfather thing, because grandparents are like, okay, kid, well, maybe I don't agree that your parents won't let you have pop after 8 o'clock, but, like, I'm not your mom. I cannot do that.
And one thing that he and I have spoken about in the past with Alfred is it's kind of interesting how for many years they didn't have the father-son relationship, because for most of Alfred's history he didn't show up until like after Joker, after Robin, after like half the characters.
I think it's 43?
Yeah, he just like barged into Wayne Manor and said, I'm your butler now, and Batman and Robin were too embarrassed to like tell this guy to go away. But then when you change, I mean, that's how it happened.
I wish an Alfred would barge into my house and say, he's my butler now. I could
do
that.
Yeah, it's funny, but it's after Crisis, you know, when you change the history that he raised him, it changes the whole dichotomy of their relationship, and it's so funny now that that's the default, and you can't imagine anything like different. But before then, yeah, the relationship, it was more like almost peers or like friendship, or even in those old stories, Alfred was like there was kind of like a class thing going on where like Bruce and Dick would like make fun of Alfred when he would like screw up and.
Yeah, I love. Yeah, I'm reading the Golden Age omnibuses, and there's definitely like this joke about, Alfred's trying to be a detective, and he has some detective instincts, but they always do make it a point in the Alfred stories that he ends up solving it by mistake. And us as the readers know that he solved it by mistake, but the other people around him don't know that he's like, I accidentally walked into this house where all the gangsters are.
Did you read the Duke Domestics yet?
Which, it sounds...
Okay, it starts with Bruce and Dick yelling at Alfred because he messed up his cooking again, and it ends with Alfred spanking Catwoman.
Yes, I do. Yes, I have, yes. Yeah, but we don't see that. Thank God. But, yes.
Were there other questions?
Actually, I did have one question. I noticed in your presentation, emphasized the fact that Batman doesn't go on. And I was curious, is that a personal analysis you have on the Bat character, or is that maybe?
I would say if we put on our lenses of we found this collection and what can we learn about the culture of Gotham based on the objects that were created, there ain't a lot of weapons that were made as toys. The focus of the merchandise is on the gadgets and the cool technology more than it is on guns.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Also, to the exhibition, I really like the idea that you are putting together an exhibition which needs to be explored and it tells a story. And so I was wondering if you also kind of, since it's also about material culture and the objects, if you offer some kind of objects that can be touched and played with by...
Yeah, always. We always treat exhibition development as multimodal. People learn in all different ways. Some people learn by looking. Some people learn by conversation. Some people learn by listening or by contemplating. And some people learn kinesthetically by touching. And so we always want to make sure that there are toys, generally not collection. They may be duplicates, but they're classified in a way that they're learning tools, and we know they're going to either get stolen or used up. So, for instance, when we do a Hot Wheels exhibit, we've got hundreds of Hot Wheels that they send to us that are duplicates to send down the track because we know we're going to have to keep replacing those on a constant basis. And that's different than the accessioned artifacts that are part of the collection that are behind glass.
I just had
Oh, yes, and then...
Oh, okay. I just had a question about your background, Christian, as far as how you got museum profession and how you wound up where you're at the Children's.
My training was in history, art, and museum studies, and my graduate degree is in historical administration. So I trained to work in museums and archives from the outset. One of the unusual things is that most children's museums don't have collections. If you've been to one in your community, they're generally about blowing bubbles and building blocks. And so the Children's Museum of Indianapolis is kind of in a class by itself in that way, in that we've been committed to the real since our inception. And so when they hired me and when I hire my collection staff, it's almost always from outside of the Children's Museum world, and instead from history museums or natural science, because those are the museums that have objects. So my background comes from other kinds of museums than children's museums. What we've done is to overlay the learning theory of how families learn together in a experiential environment onto objects like dinosaur bones that we're digging up in Wyoming or Columbus-era cannon from Dominican Republic.
So I was wondering, Kristen, if you could talk a little bit about maybe like the different strata of family beyond just sort of hierarchical, either father-son,
Yes.
son-father. Like, does Batman have cousins? Is there anyone in the family that you could position as the same level of hierarchy, but still family?
So I think in terms of age and Bruce Wayne, isn't Batwoman's, I think she's supposed to be his cousin. Oh, I mean, she is his cousin, excuse me. But I don't think they give her that same place in the Batman family. And I don't think the comics really give her the same place so yeah, technically yes, but really practically the way they do it, as plenty of other speakers have said, it's extremely male dominated. And Batman is the big name that's drawing these people in, so I don't think they really give him an equal within his family.
Well, and this gets to maybe a deeper question about when you're talking about these characters who do have this expansive, in many ways changing chronology. When we discuss this idea that, really Alfred only comes in much later in the story. He pops out for a while, then we get Aunt Harriet for a while.
Yeah. Who
is actually, I guess, supposed to be Dick's actual aunt, and then disappears after Crisis and never spoke to them.
Yep.
How as you're trying to piece together essentially the archaeology of Batman and how really the writers themselves try to create this unified theory of it. How you as an academic and possibly them as a writer, but really you as an academic, when you're looking at it, you have to say, okay, this was what was established. This is the new canon, but really we still have these outstanding issues. How do you integrate that into understanding of the Batman family? When you try to describe what this family is, you want to just look at, okay, this is what the official deal is. What do you want to say when we look at this expansion? We can see how an anterior fits into that entire family dynamic of the family tree of Batman.
So I'm a historian, so I like to take it chronologically because I think there's been real changes, not just but even in how they write the comics, and they've put much more effort into giving those relationships depth. I think from maybe the 80s or so on, because I love the older ones, and I think in the Golden Age they just kind of put Bruce and Dick they just sort of like naturally assume you'll take it as father-son, but they don't do things to kind of overtly make it that way, because every once in a while you'll have Bruce say this kind of weird line like, oh, I love you as much as if you were my own son, and I feel like that's kind of awkwardly like undercutting adopted families and the relationship, but everybody just rolls along with it. But I mean, people rolled along with Alfred spanking Catwoman, so I think it's important to keep in mind what time period it is and what's going on in that period. And every once in a while they do gesture to that, because in that 2006 Face to Face, Bruce does say, I'm going to adopt you as my son, Tim, because I can't adopt you as my ward. And I feel like the unspoken part is like, because that's a weird thing that we did in the 40s that we don't do anymore. So I think you've got to take the different time period into account. In one of the other panels, we were kind of you wrote up, like, if we try to smooth it out too much, are we essentializing it? And so I think that's easy to do with a family thing, and that's why I kind of try to take it a little bit period by period. And I also try to keep in mind what's going on in the real world, because I think that, of course, while there are narrative reasons why Dick and Jason don't so much gel during Jason's short tenure as Robin, I think the main reason was because Nightwing was a Titans property, and they weren't, like, that wasn't their interest. And so I think, practically speaking, the real reason that Tim and Dick were allowed to develop such a relationship is because they had moved Nightwing back into the Bat family. And I think I remember reading once that somebody had approached, like, let's turn Nightwing into a space cop, like Green Lantern. And I think if we had like, Nightwing Space Cop, I don't think we would have had the Tim, Dick bond. Plus, it would have been weird. So, yeah, I mean, it's like, hey, my brother's home from space. So, yeah. I don't know, I feel like I was rambling. Did that answer?
No, it's great.
Good question.
You really gave a lot of space.
Well, I think you always have to adjust little bits, too, because, all these characters have been around for 80, well, a lot of them have been around for 80 years, because, that's kind of rare, because, you don't get TV shows that are around for 80 years. It's, you get these big properties, and you have to adjust for the times, or they like to keep, everyone has to be perpetually 29 years old.
And plus the different, particularly with the Bruce and his Robin's bond, as other people have mentioned, Batman in particular is flexible, and so you've got a very paternalistic Batman, particularly in, say, the 66 show, and then you've got Frank Miller, like, I'm the goddamn Batman, who is taking his Robin into a cave and having him, he was kidnapping him and leaving him in a cave to eat rats. But, like, they sort of both, that's not my preferred version, but you have to take that into account, too. There's so many different ways of writing it.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you for staying.